Thank you very much. Thank you. And I'm really excited by the other presentations that I've seen today. So many of them interest me and connect to what we're talking about. As I want to explain to you a little bit about industrial archaeology as a discipline, something we've been teaching here at Michigan Tech for 25 years now. And then move into this next idea of industrial heritage to explain a little bit about why I think this is so important and interesting and compelling. Starting with a little bit with an image to reflect our thoughts of the Quincy smelter photographed by the Historic American Engineering Record in 1977. One of the, what I believe is the last standing 19th century copper smelter in North America, right across the lake from us. And it's a fascinating way to begin because the Industrial Revolution is such an important topic, and you may find it weird that an archaeologist has an interest in this subject. When I should really be interested in something more archaeological like the Neolithic Revolution. And what I want you to think about are those two ideas. The Neolithic Revolution was that period in human time when we invented settled life, domesticated plants and animals. Rapidly thereafter, the invention of pottery and then metallurgy and then glass. It transformed the human's relationship to the world. And frankly, the Neolithic Revolution pales in comparison to the significance of the Industrial Revolution in global history. And yet, we don't understand as much about it as we think. The more and more scholars have learned about both the Industrial Revolution and the Neolithic Revolution is that both of them are actually not revolutions. They're evolutions. And even more, as we look, you would think, the Industrial Revolution all happened during recorded history. Shouldn't we know from documents and photographs everything there is to know about it? And no, we don't. And there's a principal reason why we don't. Is that we know a lot about the people who were the leaders, the designers, the implementers of ideas and policies, but really when it came down to the day-to-day activities of work, those people were not literate. And I don't mean in a sense they're illiterate, that they didn't know how to write or read or whatever. They did all those things, but generally this working culture, those of you who are mechanics, for example, or work at a forge or have ever done work like that, you don't learn that by reading books. It's an embodied knowledge that people in those communities celebrate physically. You learn through apprenticeship and by doing. So as a consequence, that entire group, as we transform the world into the industrial age, is mute to us except through the physical residues of their lives. That's why industrial archaeology is so interesting to me, so phenomenally important. Excuse me, going the wrong way. We train students to get into these ideas and research and add to our academic knowledge about the history of this process. And as we do it, we start with real nuts and bolts basic tools. Those material residues we start recording by hand, drawing with a tape measure and a compass, literally starting by learning the craft of representing what you see. Landscape transformations, the biographies of buildings and machinery, learning to look at things and listen to the story that they will teach you about what happened there. And all of these things, we teach all of the possible technologies and threads because archaeology fundamentally draws in all these other disciplines of which all of you participate. And in a day-to-day life, we may talk to, I may work with a nuclear chemist, I may work with an ethnomusicologist, I may work with somebody who's a folklorist, and I may talk to someone who's a materials scientist or a process engineer. As we're investigating workplaces and residences and the interrelationships between the two, moving our recording into more sophisticated mechanisms as we look at and try and untie all the threads of evidence represented in the physical remains of these points in time. Looking at this building, recognizing that the building influenced what happened there. The machines had a will in the design of the process, but so did the creative people who worked in that space over time. Tie those threads together and begin to reconcile historic threads, what we see on the ground, the maps that we can make with historic maps, for example. How do they match up and how do they not? And why does that matter? Start to look at more sophisticated tools for representing these things. This three-dimensional underground representation of the workings from the cliff mine out on the peninsula, where people come out and walk around that site and have no idea that the majority of the site is under their feet and they'll never see it. Ever. And the majority of people who worked there at the mine spent more than half of their waking lives under there. This idea that we can help people visualize that as part of our work. We're out there doing research to add to knowledge about industrial history, industrial cultures, industrial life. And our students are able to take that information, and as we're all working as part of a team to increase our knowledge in our little areas, we're also sharing with the communities. Some of you may recognize this digital scan of the Champion shaft, shaft house, the internal and external represented in 3D point cloud, which is really sophisticated, fantastic technology, photorealistic. You can run it in the dark and create photographic images. This material, these files can then be ported in different ways. So if you wanted to allow someone to use a 3D printer in Tokyo to print out an HO scale model for their railroad, you could ship them the file and they could do that. But at the same time, our students who are working with all this stuff, learning all this stuff, think about all the uses. That's really fantastic. But then they're going to turn around and they're going to say, okay, well, here's the data from my work, and give it to the community that lives around Champion, that own and maintain that site, who have no capacity to work with LiDAR technology, 3D processing. What are we going to do? Well, we talk to them about how does this matter? Because all of us in producing our knowledge, we're meddling around in something that is actually a sacred site to the people around it. That mill at Champion, if you're not aware, great things happen there and terrible things. The people who live there are taking care of that site because it's somewhere they take their kids, it's somewhere they see on the landscape and they can talk about it because it's part of their community. It is a physical manifestation, a physical place of the people of that group. And like all archaeological sites, it shouldn't surprise us that it is so. So all of the work that we do, as we're doing our work, we have to push our students to think about the ethics and the professionalism and their commitment to these communities in which they work, so that all of our work now is kind of like a public performance art. Whenever possible, we do all of it with a maximum amount of public involvement and exposure, drawing those stakeholder groups we've been hearing about into the process so that they will share with us their stories about their history, as well as we can share what we have learned and discovered as they come along these journeys with us. One project, for example, in Utah, where we're studying a group of immigrant potters who come from different places back east and moved west with the Latter-day Saints. We ran a project in a small desert town out on the edge of the north side of the Grand Canyon almost, canyon country. During this project, it was open all the time. Anyone could come visit us during our field work at any moment. And they did. Hundreds of people in a small town. It really blew us away. The students even were part of a museum exhibit where they sat and recorded work, and actually people brought things from the community that they could look at and record and share stories with as part of the exhibit during the work. And while these people are coming out here, what I want you to understand is how fantastic this is. These people come out, and they don't just come and see and look in the hole and leave. They're there for a long time. We're able to talk to them about all kinds of subjects, and we're discussing different things. This is one of the structures we excavated. It's a Pottery Kiln Foundation, and we can talk about how amazing it is. This is an example of pyrotechnology from a group of immigrants who, as far as we know, never built or operated one of these. They were throwers in a factory with special factory skills for making pottery. How did they figure this out? We were able to look at these fragments and say, look at these. Some of these are different. Some of them are clean. Some of them have this grit in it, this temper. And why is that? How did this happen? And we can talk with them about the strategies we're going to answer those questions using thin section slides and looking at isotope patterns and comparing clays and finished products and wasters from the product, from the factory. And as we're having that analysis, what we're really talking about with them is not just what we know, but epistemology, how we know what we know about ourselves and our past. And they're interested. That we can take these isotopic signatures like fingerprints, and now we can actually track potters where as it travels through the social economy over time. And we're beginning small studies where we can plot the distributions of these commodities among consumer communities. And what we're finding, as a way of an example here in this small study, the Muddy Mission, a little isolated community way out in the middle of what at the time was the edge of the known universe, has pottery, these fragile commodities that are being shipped over hundreds and hundreds of miles and appearing in this location in consumer community. And we can sit and have conversations with people about how this violates the fundamental principles of market capitalism, which we don't have time to talk about right now. But trust me. And people have conversations with us about that. What is the nature of society? And what is the nature of our interactions and our behaviors? And how does religion and economy all intertwine? And we're having conversations about this with people on a regular basis. Some of you maybe have been out to visit us at the Cliff Mine, working locally here in the Keweenaw. And as we're out here with teams of students, always teams of learners working these discoveries, we're excavating and uncovering material. In this case, this is 2011, when we're working at the first excavations in the 1850s and 60s stamp mill, teasing out the biography of this building and what we can understand about the evolution and design of the technical process and the experience of working here. And while we were out there, and we've been having conversation about education and marketing, 1% of the 3-county area came to visit us. And we had no marketing budget or organized effort at all. And to give you an idea, that other slide, that New York project, if the people within an hour and a half drive, if 1% of them had come to see us, we would have filled Met Stadium. People care, and they want to learn. And what's really fascinating is that they're out here, they're learning all about stamp mills and all that jazz, and we're helping them to see things the way archaeologists do by putting stamps back in the mill. But we're also having conversations with them with what they want to talk about, which is, you know, is the stamp sand killing the fish in Eagle River? We're telling them about what it was like to work here, how you physically move around this space, what machines were where, what it would have been like. And they're asking us, what was life like? And if the stamp sand is damaging the fish, how come the road commission can scoop it up and spread it around on the roads as snow melt? If something's poisonous, why isn't it poisonous all the time? And we get to have these conversations about what is the point of thinking about this place? What was daily life like? What were people's lives like in their cabins? People want to know who lived where in which communities. Where did they go to church? What were their clothes like? What kind of food did they eat? What were the networks of supply for them growing food and producing food versus bringing food in through the network of systems that supported them as a mining frontier? And certainly not just bread, but roses too. How did people transform the world into something, an environment in which they considered to be beautiful? Bringing the heirloom roses, for example, still growing wild out there from the 1840s. As we think about these things, as we're having these experiences, there's this overwhelming effect that we have to deal with as industrial archaeologists. Here, Carmela Davila, one of our graduates, interviewing Senor Ramirez in Ponce in Puerto Rico. It's a sugar central, a factory producing sugar that had since closed and was a defunct monument. The thing about industrial communities and industrial workers is that when we invented the idea of heritage, we did it to think about what people like Aboriginal communities and Native communities, how they relate to their history and their past and their landscapes. We thought about folk identity, and like the folk musicians or folk artists or people who were not part of the modern world. The folk idea was the concept from which the idea of heritage came. It was something that we had to get back to understanding as industrial peoples. So people like Senor Ramirez here were excluded from that definition. So if you're a museum curator, how do you explain this to people? I don't have too much time, but here an example from one of the world's largest coal mines that's ever existed. It's one of the most technologically sophisticated places in the world. Trying to capture and explain what it meant to be in this blue-collar community. The soccer clubs that played here. What does it mean to be part of this community? What did these people value? What did they care about? And as we think about those people in that community, and you think about that coal mine as an example of Zahlven in the Ruhr Valley of Germany, here was an incredibly depressed community filled with urban poverty. The coal mine had closed down. They had all lost their jobs, and it was formerly this isolated single industry town. And then that hole in the middle of their community suddenly became a park. in a museum. What an opportunity to think about things. The stakeholder communities aren't just those residents where you have all the experts coming in to save them in economic development, in urban planning, in civil engineering, in environmental engineering to mitigate the toxins, but they're coming in to help them because they want, they have expertise that can help the situation. Maybe they've raised money from outside. But as they do that, they often forget that the voice of the local people in that community, it's their heritage which really matters. And Copper Country Explorer being one example of an organic community grown up around these ideas, where some fella, Mike Forgrave, starts typing out descriptions and putting up photographs on the internet of monuments and ruins around the Copper Country. And over time, it flourishes into this vibrant community of people sharing stories of fascination about these ideas and these places and the landscapes and the stories. Completely organic, not planned, not marketed, the envy of, I think, chambers of commerce around heritage development and museum development. But the question I want to leave you with is, and the question we put our students to when we're thinking about sending them out to work in these environments, as brokers of heritage. This is a plate that was made by Josiah Wedgwood's factory for Catherine the Great. And what matters about the story is the picture in the middle there, the ruin. The ruin was a symbol being used in the 1700s here as a way of creating the pastoral landscapes of all these other people. We were able to appreciate the pastoral quaintness of this landscape because we were modern, and that was not us. If you get on the internet and you look around for, go onto Flickr and look for ruin porn or aesthetics of abandonment, or get onto YouTube and Google for something like urban exploration, what you find are thousands of people in the world today fascinated with industrial decline. One example here, Mr. Deuce's photo of the Packard plant from Detroit. And Detroit is the darling of the aesthetics of industrial decline. And I wonder, what kind of world building are we doing in this process? And I wonder if there are ways in which we can improve the way in which our students can go in and help work in these environments to retain the fabric and the residues and the stories of industrial life for the communities that value and treasure them, so that those people feel meaningfully a part of mitigation efforts, of redevelopment efforts, of having a voice that is valued and respected in the process of transformation of our post-industrial environments. Thank you very much.